The more you listen, the more you know. This is Good Politics with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman.
And we're back. Just a moment ago, we talked a lot about the economy and jobs report numbers, a lot of the breaking market indicators for February. Now, I think we want to dive a bit deeper into the economy.
Right. So we're sticking with the economy. The year has ended, and so therefore we've got a lot of year-end data that's come in. And it's really interesting because the thing that has defined the data so far has been revision. And so we're dealing with this idea of what do we do when these indicators change and how do we make sense of these indicators? To start us off, let's talk about the key thing. This is really the elephant in the room, economic growth. I hope you understand that really is the key indicator for how the U.S. macroeconomy is doing. And so you've got these different strategies and these different philosophies that the parties have about economic growth. In the fourth quarter, Adam, what came in is the number 2.1%. And for the year, it is 2.3%. That pretty much is what we had expected. I think I told you in one of our summer shows that I was thinking the end of the year would be about 2.3, 2.4%, and that's what it came in.
You nailed it.
But it's low.
That is low because in some of those older episodes, you told us that they need about 3% GDP growth to be able to make their numbers work.
Right. So they need about 3% in order to get their arithmetic to work. With 2.3% growth, what we ended up with, an increase in our GDP of $836.5 billion. Basically, let's round it. Around $840 billion came in new GDP this year. And we ran a deficit that was around $980 billion. So the deficit is higher than the amount of money added to the growth. Now, the deficit is on a different calendar. It's on a fiscal year basis. It runs from October 1st to October 1st, where we're dealing with a calendar year basis going January to January. I've not put those numbers exactly correlated month to month, so we're just dealing with two different calendars, but it's not that big of a deal. The end of the year, you get $836 billion added to the U.S. economy while you're running a deficit of about $980 billion. Deficit is larger, so that technically means for accounting purposes that you're in the red. In order to hear the administration on this, let's start off with clip number 4. This is from Steve Minuchin.
And I would just comment that GDP is slightly under our projections as a result of some particular one-time things. Boeing's had a big impact on this, the GM strike and others. But the president has been very focused on delivering for working people, and we see it in the numbers.
So who is Minuchin?
Minuchin is one of their big guys on trade. They either bring out Navarro, Minuchin, or they bring out Kudlow. Kudlow's the number one guy on the economy. But these are trade guys. Minuchin is also someone who's a little bit sober in terms of what he says. You know, Kudlow's much more optimistic. But here's the thing I think we should take from this.
So in the face of these low numbers, how do you explain his response to this?
Minuchin and a lot of these people are going to offer you excuses, and you shouldn't take them. You know, there was the GM strike, or we had something wrong with Boeing. These are just excuses because these things normally happen. I mean, these particular things might normally happen, but you can't not have 1 year without happenstance. Remember, they were also blaming it on the interest rates. They wanted the Fed to get lower. Well, it's hard to go in that direction because the Fed has cut 3 times in a row, which might make it all right for this year. I think we are going to be all right this year. I think you're going to get about 2.5% growth, which is a good statistic. But they want 3%, and they're not hitting it. Now, the one thing I want to say is I don't think they should be using excuse logics. I don't think that works. Here's
you kind of blame Boeing in that last clip.
The problem is that they're going to blame what else? They're just going to pick something out of a grab bag when they don't get the statistic. What I would say is a better narrative is to appeal to a breather year, because that happens. So these numbers don't go up and up and up and up and up. They go up, they go down. You know, there's always I would appeal to the concept of a breather year. The economy does do that. The one thing that I want to do is talk a little bit about what's going to happen next year. This is the narrative that these people have. And remember. We're talking economic numbers, the indicators, and the narrative. You cannot talk numbers without also talking about narratives. You know, they're battling back and forth. And the interesting thing here is the numbers have changed because of the revisions. But for next year, this is what their narrative is. They've signed all these trade agreements. They've got the phase 1 with China. They've got the USMCA. They've got interest rates that have been cut 3 times, baby steps, but still 3 times. And so they're probably in a situation where they're hoping to get some tailwind. It's interesting to see what they're going to say about it. Let's hear their eternal optimist, Larry Kudlow, clip number 5.
I just asked, we had Ray Dalio with us earlier, and he said that he thinks in the next 5 years you will see a downturn. Just playing the odds, looking at how long of a growth spurt that we've seen. He said if that happens, he's worried about what happens next. First of all, the Fed is not going to have the power to lower and stimulate the economy like it has in the past. And then he worries on the fiscal front because he thinks the nation is more divided. What would you say to that?
Well, look, Ray Dalio is a friend. He's a very smart guy, and I've heard his view. But first of all, I don't want to get too far ahead of the story. In 5 years, I don't know, well, we may all be doing something else. And what you've got here in the Trump years is essentially a mini upcycle. You've gone from 1.5% to 2% growth. We had it going at almost 4%. Then the Fed tightened. We're now down to 2.5% to 3%. I'm looking for faster growth. I think we're going to get 3% this year.
He's blaming the Fed. The Fed tightened up the... Wait, real quick. Is this one of those excuses that you're talking about?
Right. There's a lot said there. And there's so much to pick in. There's like 3 or 4 different things we can get into. But let's just start with something basic. Whenever we play a clip from Michael Moore, I always say this is an example of how the American liberal mind thinks. We look at what he always gives you his ideology. Kudlow is doing the same thing. He's giving you his supply side theory. All the time he's pushing that. And he's an optimist. These supply siders are one thing, God bless them, they're always going to be eternal optimists. And so one of the things he's trying to tell you is that, yeah, I think we are going to get 3% this year. He's the guy who said that we were still going to get 3% in the back half of last year. He was wrong. So he's still pushing the 3%. Now, what's funny for him is he says the Fed ruined it. He's trying to say that he wants these interest rates to be lower, as if easy money will solve everything. But I have to tell you something. Europe is not growing very well. The UK and Germany and so forth have these problems, and they had interest rates at 0. And so the easy money isn't working over there. And it's so funny to hear him try to say that. The interest rates, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I hope you understand. In America, the standard interest rate when the economy was good for a long, long period of time, it was around 7%. Then we decided to adjust that. It got down to about 5%. That was the sort of the Clinton standard. And now, with the economy supposedly being good right now, he says we're on a mini upcycle, we can't really hold them even at 2%. They won't put those rates back up again. And this is why the person is now saying things like, gosh, Larry, when this runs out, when we finally do hit recession, we won't have the tools in the Fed to lower the rates because they're already too low and we're running trillion-dollar deficits. Isn't somebody going to have to pay for this drunken party? That's one of the narratives, that this is a kind of a party that's going to come and the chickens are going to come home to roost at some point.
Right.
So, and again, this is not Kudlow's thing. Kudlow's thing is no. We're on an upcycle. We're going to get 3% this year. My forecast for you, by the way, I think we're going to get 2.5. My listeners should know I nailed it this year. It's true. I had half of the year in when I predicted it, but I think it's 2.5
for 2020.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, so this idea on the Fed, the interaction between the Fed and the economy is like lowering the interest rates is like throwing fuel on the fire. But when they lower them too low, I mean, you run out of fuel. You can't lower the interest rates for the next recession, is what you're saying.
The Fed wanted to bring the interest rates back to the pre-recession, Great Recession normal. 4% should be the interest rate if your economy really is okay. And this is what David Stockman is saying. You're creating this artificial bubble. When you lower the rates, it makes the stock market go up because these people borrow this money at really what is below market rate, which is something that the Fed is doing. And then they throw it in their stocks and they create an asset bubble.
Right.
And so that's one of the fears, is that a lot of this portfolio growth is actually manufactured.
Oh.
Now, because everybody wants the rates to be low because it's like Santa Claus, then this puts political pressure for everyone to keep the party going. Nobody wants bad news. Remember when President Obama was in office, you didn't have as large of a deficit. He was trying to do this honestly, pay as you go, and that meant the growth was a little more paced. 2% economy, this is the new normal. And the supply side said, excuse me, that's not the American normal. 2% is not good enough. We're going to get you 3%. And so now they're trying to live with the fact that they're having trouble
getting
3%, and you're running these deficits. Now, listen, let's keep going with this. I told you this Minuchin guy, he's a little bit more of a straight shooter. Let's hear what he says on this. Play clip number 3.
Are you still looking at a 3% economic growth number for 2020?
I think our projections have been reduced because of Boeing and other impacts, so it will be lower. I think we would have hit 3%, but again, Boeing has had a big impact on our exports, being the largest exporter. I think that could be 50 basis points or not more. There's no question that the virus will have some impact on global growth and some impact on the U.S. But again, we're very focused on the president is delivering jobs and delivering wage growth.
He said we would have hit 3%, but again, Boeing. And then he says the virus.
Yeah, the virus.
Coronavirus.
That's the one I heard. He's already got,
Come on.
we could list it now. Why we're not going to get 3. He's listing the virus. I mean, you could list anything if they don't get 3. You just pull something out of the bag. I have one more clip here from Navarro, and he's another trade guy. And I think he's probably being a little bit more honest. I mean, Minuchin was honest, but he didn't give us a number. He just said we wouldn't hit 3. The talking point Navarro says is it'll be near 3, which I think is realistic. I will tell you this, if these guys get 2.5 or better, it's a good number. Let's briefly hear from Navarro, then I'll take us out of there. It's play clip number 9.5.
We're going to get real GDP growth closer to 3% than 2%. That's going to be very robust. We're going to see Dow 32,000 by the end of the year, and we're going to break 30,000 fairly soon. I predicted that some months ago.
So his claim is that it'll be somewhere near 3, but it won't be 3. So there you have it. Let's do this. Let's talk now about these revisions. Adam, what we're going to talk now is very critical, these revisions. Everything we've talked about with economic growth under the Trump administration and under the Obama administration, the last 4 years there, in that time span, some of those numbers have changed, okay, because they get more data in. And so, it's so funny. This is so funny that we're talking about whether these indicators matter. Obviously, they matter. But when the indicators change, it really gets weird. So let's take a look at what these changes are. Here are your economic growth numbers now, the best numbers that we have for how President Trump has done with his supply-side economics for 3 years and how President Obama did in his second term. And it's kind of interesting, these numbers. The first thing I want to do, Adam, is just look at nominal growth. Okay, I don't want to factor in inflation. So this is not factoring in inflation. I hope you understand when they report GDP numbers, the numbers we've been talking about, 2% growth, et cetera, that is factors in inflation. These numbers are not going to factor in inflation. It's just nominal numbers. So here we are. President Trump, 2019, 4%. 2018, 4.9%. 2017, 4.88%, for an average of 4.6%. So what that means is the size of the American economy each year grew nominally, the amount of the dollars, 4.6% under President Trump. Now let's compare Obama. We're going 2016, 15, 14, and 13, going backward in time, the last 4 years, and the numbers are as follows. 3.49, 2.81, 4.49, 4.43, for an average of 3.8. So in nominal terms, the amount of dollars that we get extra per year is more under Trump. And it's actually significantly more in nominal terms.
4.6 average versus 3.8.
Yes.
However, wouldn't the lower Fed interest rates, that's basically creation of money. You have these asset bubbles going out.
Now, hold on. The rates were lower under Obama because they started taking them up. They tried to take them up and bring them back to normality. Okay, and let me say something else about the Fed. It's not just the rates, it's the quantitative easing. They were doing that, and they were trying to fix that as well under Trump. That's the other thing that Trump was complaining about, is that the Fed was fixing its balance sheet. So they were dumping all that stuff on the market, whereas with Obama, they were buying a bunch of stuff to try to fix things. You had the quantitative easing going on. So there's that. The one thing Trump can claim is that the Fed policy has been more hostile toward him, but that's because we were getting out of the Great Recession. Now, let's do this. The numbers with Trump on nominal growth clearly are better, but once you factor in inflation, it changes the picture, Adam. And we have to factor inflation because inflation, even though we don't have inflation right now, very much, it still is just a little bit higher than it was under Obama. Remember, for some years, you had price deflation under Obama. For some years, you had inflation rate was 1%, 1.5%. They assume inflation should be normal at 2%. So they're trying to have it around the 2% mark. As long as it's below that, or at or below that, they consider that to be normality. So there's been a little bit more inflation under the Trump administration that affects the numbers. So here we are with the actual numbers, the numbers that get reported, not the nominal numbers.
So the real GDP.
Yeah,
growth.
real GDP. Remember, their goal is 3%. Here are their numbers. We're going Trump 2019, 2.3%. 2018, the year of the tax cut, Adam, 2.5%. It was revised down. It was 2.9. They could claim they got their 3% that year in 2018. That was revised down. They only got 2.5. However, in 2017, it got revised up to 2.8, which is a pretty good number. So when you average all of that out 3 years in a row, the average growth rate that you're getting from the Trump administration is 2.5% in real GDP growth. And Adam, I've just given you my forecast for this year. I think that's what it's going to come in at. And this administration is going to be a 2.5% growth administration. Now, how is Obama? When we factor in inflation here, what we see, 2016, 2%. 2015, 1.9, pretty low there. 2014, 2.9, huge. He got 3% growth in 2014. 2013, 2.6. The key to focus in with Obama, the last 2 years, really he slipped. 1.9 and 2.0 in the last two.
Can you see why that was?
It just happened. And so let's give his average. His average is 2.4%. So his average for his second term is 2.4 and Trump is 2.5. There's not that hardly any difference. There's not hardly any difference in the average.
2014, he nearly hit 3%. I mean, that's great.
3%. Look,
on the other hand, those supply-siders are saying, oh, the 3% should be the new normal, but
when he did at least get it for 1 year. All right, let's transition now, and let's go back retro and listen to Warren Buffett. This is dealing with the issue of what is the new normal. You know, remember there's this conversation about how the American economy, how should we expect it to grow? Here's the problem. It's a huge economy. Right now, Adam, the size of the U.S. economy is $21.734 trillion. Think about that. Let me give you these statistics. The U.S. economy is $21.734 trillion in size at the end of 2019.
Over $21 trillion, though.
Yeah, so it's almost $22 trillion economy. So the problem is you can't grow that beast at 3% annually like that. Is, you know, what happens is when these economies get like this, then their growth kind of goes lower. You know, you'll notice that in 2017, Trump added $927 billion to the GDP. In 2018, it was $979 billion added to the GDP. This last year was $836 billion added to the GDP. So those are large numbers. So what I'm trying to say to you is if he really does get 2.5 this year, that has to be considered a great number for the American economy. 2.5 is a very reasonable number. This is pretty much is what Warren Buffett was trying to say. Warren Buffett was trying to say, hey, 2% itself is fine. Let's play clip number 31.
But 2% is not bad, incidentally.
No.
2% will make, if we had 2% for a generation, 25 years, you would have a $19,000 GDP gain per person in the United States. I'm a broken record on this subject, but since the fall of 2009, literally, it's been about 2% a year, you know, and I don't think the figures are necessarily that accurate when you get to tenths and all of that. I'm sure it's sped up a little bit sometimes and fallen back just a little. It's been 2% a year now for 7.5 years, and I don't think we've really seen anything like that. I mean, it was a great recession, but the recovery has been very steady.
The celebrity billionaire Warren Buffett, he believes that 2% is good. And we're seeing 2.5%, 2.4 averaging for Obama. And so maybe this isn't so bad.
Right. So here's the thing to take from that. One of those clips is a little bit old. He was talking about during the Obama administration when the numbers didn't look quite so good, but they were just at 2. You know, that started this conversation. They were saying you're only getting 2. The average throughout American history is 3. But pulling out the average is kind of difficult because you got the industrial period when there was like the numbers are really, really high. So one of the things that's interesting, he says, is because this economy is so big, even 2% is going to be functional. And like you just said, 2.4, 2.5 should be a great number for an economy that's this size. But here's the thing that you have to remember, Adam. That's only true if your deficit isn't you got to pay create more value each year than your deficit. So like if you're only getting 2% or 2.5%,
you're adding how many ever trillions of dollars, but yet your government is still spending more.
Right. I think the point would be is whatever growth is going to be there, 2.4, 2.5%, and we factor in that that's probably about $900 billion extra in value, that deficit's got to come down. Now, the deficit is close to that right now, but that you really want to have a deficit that's at least a few $100 billion below that mark. You need to cut at least about $200 billion out of that deficit.
Ideally, it would be great if we can have $900 billion in spending and deficit. But if we're increasing the size of our economy by $900 billion, then if they increased linearly, if they were stuck together in the same number, that would be perfect, right?
Well, if you don't want to wash, then you're not getting any richer.
Oh.
So what you want to do is you want that deficit to come in smaller than the growth figure. That's the whole thing, Adam. Growth erases all the problems. If they could get 3% growth and have well over $1 trillion in new value coming into the U.S. economy every single year, then they wouldn't have to worry about the deficit. They could run their $900 billion deficit. No one would care because the debt burden into perpetuity, if you kept doing that, would make that disappear. And it's a burden concept, not a dollar concept. It's a burden concept. And so in any event, you do want the deficit below that figure.
Looks like we have a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to dive a little bit more into this.
Politics without allegiance. You're listening to Good Politics with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman.